Greetings, traveler.
Hey guys, and welcome to another State of the Meta video where we will be taking a closer look at the meta and how you can draft in order to do well in it. Alright, so before we dive into any class, let me just quickly paint a picture of what's going on right now. We have two classes that are performing very well. We have Paladin and Rogue, which are, according to the HS replay stats, over 54%. Now that is extreme. That's oppressive. That is a big gap. Now this means that all the other classes are below 50%, including Mage, which is kind of crazy. This resembles that time where Hunter was really strong and Priest was like fairly good. But it's, yeah, right now if you are trying to win, if you're playing for leaderboards, or if you just want to have more gold, earn packs more efficiently, there is no reason for you not to pick a Rogue or a Paladin in this current format. Now, this is not a video where I judge the meta, right? This is a video where we talk about how you can do well in this environment, because you can always do well in no matter what environment. It's just about finding what works. It doesn't mean that, because Paladin or Rogue are very strong, that you can just pick them and automatically get a bunch of 12s. You still need to know what to do. You need to know how to beat the other Rogues and the Paladins, and obviously all the other classes that people will also be picking. So that's what this video is about. This video is about helping you succeed in this environment. Let's get to it. So first up, I've got two Paladin decks for you guys here that both went 12. So we'll be taking a look at what exactly made them succeed. Now, in order to do that, we need to know what kind of a meta this is. Right now, we are in a very tempo-heavy meta. This means that you need to spend resources to gain position on the board. If you are in a more value-oriented meta, the board is a lot less important, and it usually is paired with either a lack of curve in the draft or an abundance of AoE, making the curve somewhat redundant. Now, we're seeing far less AoEs right now. Priest is not dominant, there's not a bunch of Psychic Screams around, and you have no problem filling out your curve, usually. So we're going back to how Arena was played a long time ago, which is Hearthstone, right? So we had a very, I would say that Arena changed a lot when Ungoro came out, where you had these cards like Meteor and all, Valspine, Slayer, and all these cards that just said, well, it's not that bad that you're off the board, just gonna get you on the board again. So right now, it's much more important that you're on the board, especially as a Paladin, because a lot of your powerful cards do very little, if anything at all, if you do not have initiative. Silver Swords is just pretty much unplayable if you don't have a board. Steed, not very impressive without a board, right? So we need a lot of early game. Now that means 1-drops and 2-drops especially. So I prefer having 1-drops because you can play a 1-drop and then hero power on turn 2. So let's say, for instance, you've played a Light's Justice on turn 1, or you've played a Lost in the Jungle on 1. If you don't make a hero power, there is a decent chance that you can deal. If not, you can either deal or close to deal with your opponent's 2-drop. Whereas if you had skipped turn 1, that probably wouldn't have been the case. You skip turn 1, you just make a hero power. That's not going to cut it. I would say that is the #1 mistake I see right now when people are drafting Paladins, is they are not respecting the early game enough. The amount of Paladins that both skip turn 1 and hero power on turn 2 is still very high in my experience in the Paladins I'm playing, especially at the lower wins. So if you have not had a great amount of success with Paladin right now, I would say err on the side of caution and almost overdraft the early game and just see how important it is for you to land either a 1 or a good 2. I feel if you miss 1 and you miss 2, you've pretty much lost the game. Now, that's not always true, of course, but it's true in a large amount of cases, especially in the mirror match. If you're playing Pally v Pally, your opponent plays a Righteous Protector, you pass turn 1 hero power on 2, that's kind of it. He's the one that's gonna get his steed off. He's the one that's gonna get Silver Sword off, and you're not. So very important. So when we take a look at these decks, we can see that they both have that early game. One deck got offered a bunch of 1-drops, which I think is better. You want 1-drops, as I explained earlier. 1-drop into hero power, probably better than pass into 2-drop in most cases. So you prefer the ones. The first deck here has some techie 2s, as we like to call it. It has an Acidic Swamp Ooze, Argent Protector, Direwolf, Fallen Sun. None of these minions are minions you want to play on turn 2 on their own, right? They're not great standalone 2-drops other than the Ooze, right? The Ooze is fine, but you'd prefer to hit a weapon with it. But you'll still play it on turn 2 if you have to, because tempo is very important. Now the 1-drops are really nice. You have triple Lost in the Jungle, Light's Justice, Leper Gnome was more a pick because we had to, and then Hive Queen, which was surprisingly okay because you can Hive Queen on 1, hero power on 2, and if your opponent's not doing anything, then, you know, he's not getting on the board either. So you can just make a dude on turn 3 and keep killing things for free or hit his face, and it's not that bad, right? So I'm not saying Hive Queen's OP right now, but it's definitely not as bad as it was in the past. So that's one part, right? Get the early game handled. The second part is, how are we closing games? How are we winning games? There you need the powerful value cards that will see you through it, right? So in the first list here, that will be Double Vine Cleaver, Stormwind Champion, Spike Ridge Steed. Then the Stonehill Defender can land you a strong finisher such as Terran Mortarion, and then you have Sound the Bells. So Sound the Bells has been very good for me. I usually only draft 1 copy, but I have had decks do well with 2 copies, especially if I'm a little light on the value side. So I would say the foundation is the early game. That's priority number 1. If you do not have the early game, it doesn't matter how much value you have. You're not going to be able to use it, right? So fix your early game and then pick up some value cards on the side, things that allow you to translate or transform your board control into a win, right? You can have 3 1/1s, right? That's not so good. You can have 3 1/1s and then play a Fungalmancer. That's suddenly a lot better. So cards like that, right? Cards like Stormwind Champion, a Silver Sword. I haven't been a fan of 2 Silver Swords because it feels like it's clunky. I think that you only want 2 Silver Swords if you have a really low curve deck, right? So lots of early game minions, 1-drops, preferably 1s and 2s, right? But usually you don't have that many cards offered. It's either that or you're going to be a little bit too light, but 1s and 2s, if you can get them, strong 1s, strong 2s, preferably the 1s. Then cards that allow you to win the game after that. So Steed, Vine Cleaver, Sound the Bells. We'll see in the other deck we have a Silver Sword, Sea Giant, it's also a win condition, right? You get a lot of stuff on board. You get a 4 or 5 mana giant. That'll do the trick. And then the third component is what I call the humility, dark conviction, equality. I lump all these cards in the same bucket because sometimes you'll get a good start and then your opponent plays a 3/10 Witchwood Grizzly, and then you're like, how am I getting through that thing? So it's for those situations that having 1 equality, like I usually have 1 to 2 of these effects, like an Alder Peacekeeper, humility, equality, dark conviction. Those are the 4 cards usually. And Peacekeeper is kind of tough to get because it's usually against very strong cards. So I try to have at least 1, sometimes 2 of these effects to make sure that when your opponent plays a big minion, you don't just lose half your board having to deal with that. So that's it for the Paladin, right? Strong early game, good finishers, but make sure you have that early game, right? You have these curves here as an example. You still need some mid game, right? You can't just have no 4s, no 5s, but the emphasis is definitely not there, as you can see in both decks. We had Shroom Brewer, which has been phenomenal because it helps you survive. And then in the second deck, we have Double Ghostly Charger. In the first deck, you got a Jelly, not really that. So 2 Shroom Brewers and a Guardian, and then the Gnomish and the Cursed Disciple. In the other deck, you have the Call to Arms, which obviously is amazing. double hoarding dragon, which has been good, and then the Scalewind and the chargers. So the emphasis is definitely not on the mid game, but you do still need some. Because if you have a really good start and you miss turn 4 completely, you just make a dude, that starts kind of doesn't matter anymore, right? The opponent is going to play Yeti, you're going to fall off the board, and you're not going to be able to use your fancy buffs. So I definitely had some decks where I didn't pick any mid game and I just had fancy buffs in early game, and I also didn't get there. It was a lot riskier. So just good curve, couple win conditions, definitely not too many, just a couple, and then 1 to 2 cards to help you get through those big taunts. All right, guys, trying to keep everything short and sweet. I know that you guys have stuff to do, so we will be moving on to the Rogue. All right, once again, 2 lists that did well. The first list here has is currently 7-0, haven't finished the run yet, but it just feels very powerful, and it's a good list to demonstrate what I want in Rogue. The second list went 12 wins and was also fairly low quality, not super high, definitely not, you know, some of the rogue decks you see out there. So I purposely tried to keep the quality low to show the curve and just the system behind the decks, rather than, hey, I have 2 Valspine Slayers and 2 Saps and I'm going to remove everything. Right, so I would say for Rogue right now, the most important thing, it's kind of funny, right? It's reversed to Paladin. With Rogue, I would say the most important thing is to not run out of stuff. Now, there will definitely be moments where you're gonna overdraft value, right? You're gonna, like, I'm not a huge fan of Pickpocket. It's usually a trap. People try to use too many charges. I think if you want Pickpocket, you really need to know what you're doing with the card, because it's a tricky card. You sometimes just have to be fine with getting 2 cards out of it, not more. A lot of the time people hold it and then turn 8, they skip their turn, and I'm like, cool, I just won the game because you didn't do anything with your 8 mana. But other than that, Elven Minstrel has been just crucial in my success with Rogue, because it allows you to play these still early game oriented cards and somewhat value inefficient but very tempo efficient cards such as Sap, right? It allows you to play those cards and not run out of steam. So as you see in both decks, we have, in the first deck here, we have 2 Minstrels, we have a Gilnean Royal Guard, a Violet Ward, and then some mid-game, right? So you see that it's not excessive. I'm definitely not going out of my way to have a ton of value. But when my Rogue decks have not done well, they usually have had too little, you know, call it stuff, if you will, right? You remove everything, you do the things, you have the Shadow Blades, you have the wands, and you're like, I'm out of cards and I don't have bodies to finish it with. I think that's the most important thing as well, like the value cards, right? The Minstrels and a couple big boys, not too many. You'll see that both decks, right, have 2 big boys, Worm and a Royal Guard, Worm and a Sleepy Dragon. But then it's the mid-range bodies to push with, right? So in the first deck, that will be the double Apple Bomb, the Banshee, and the Yeti. Those are real, and the Valkyrie, I suppose, to an extent. Those are good mid-range bodies to push with, because Rogue has no problem keeping the opponent off the board. It is from that position, what are you going to do? Especially against Mage. I can't stress how important this is. Rogue versus Mage is difficult and can be very frustrating if you're not experienced with Rogue. And it's usually the shortage of these mid-range bodies that gives you trouble versus Mage, because they'll hit you with the Blizzard, they'll hit you with the Flame Strike, and it's going to suck. So having cards like a Keening Banshee, or a Chillwind Yeti, or Valkyrie to buff your guys out of that range and give you something to push with, right? Attack their life total as you keep their board clear with Sap and Valspine and such. That's your win condition in those games. So a couple value cards, a couple mid-range bodies to push with, right? So I think that's my main focus, right? That's my win condition with Rogue. You can see in the other deck we have Nesting Rock, another excellent body to push with. Double Guild Recruiter in this particular list was also nice, because we had 2 2-drops, a Shiny Finder and a Zealot, no 1-drop. So this thing was almost always pulling, you know, at least a Vrygul, sometimes an Ancient Brew, or, you know, very, very nice. Now, that's one part, right? That's the win condition. How are we going to win games? How are we going to pressure our opponent? The other part is, how do we not die? Mainly against paladins, but you know, there's also hunters out there. Sometimes you have really aggressive mages, so you do need both components. How am I going to win? How am I going to not die? So that's where sap comes in. Sap, I draft sap over anything right now. Doesn't matter what's next to the sap. Like maybe Valspine in certain lists, right? If I'm fairly light and I know that I'm going to be fine, I'll pick up Valspine over sap. I'm not even sure if they're in the same bracket, but I suppose that I just don't think I've had to make the choice yet. But I would assume they're in the same bracket. They're both amazing cards. But sap just allows you to, sap is the card that, you know, turn 6, you put their 5-drop back in your hand, you play a 4-drop, suddenly you have the board and you can start to go to work. Sap is the card that allows you to fix bad board states. So the biggest thing is like pick your sap over whatever's next to it, right? People go like, oh, but you know, Eviscerate's so good and SI agent, and you know, like pick the sap, right? And use it. A big mistake, people is like, I'm gonna hold my sap for his 9-drop. It's like, no, you use it like turn 5, turn 6, turn 7, just use the sap ideally on a Spike Ridge steed, but just use the sap, get ahead on board, and from that position, just feel how nicer the game is. Now you're the one dictating the trades, you have your Yeti trading into their guy, they play a minion, you now are able to combo your Valspine, just take it out, but you're not under any pressure. You're not under any pressure, and that's where Rogue loves to be. Dictating the flow of the game, not being under pressure, able to use the life as a resource, you can suddenly equip an envenom weapon without dying, you know, those kind of things. Other cards that really help with that, you can see in this list, both decks have it. That's because I value it fairly highly, and it's not in a very contested bucket as well. It's Betrayal. Betrayal is an excellent card in this kind of style where you do want to pick those bodies to push with, right? The Yeti, the Banshee, the Nesting Rock, and you do want to pick cards like Minstrel and some big boys, right? The Violet Worm especially, a nice card. That means that there is a decent chance that your opponent is going to pressure you from the start, because not everyone is going to pick, you know, those mid-range bodies and, you know, the Minstrels and a late game card here or there, which means they're going to be ahead on board. And then Betrayal just allows you to have, once again, a swing turn where you just get a little bit of a breather, you protect your life total, and just allows you to get back on the board. Other than that, for Rogue, I would say it's about the strong 3-drops, because you can get away with Dagger on 2. A lot of my decks do Dagger on 2. Doesn't mean I won't pick 2-drops, right? There's a lot of cases where I'll just pick it up. You see the first deck here does have a Fairy Dragon, does have a Tuskar Fisherman, right? So it's not that I hate any early game, but it's not like with Paladin where you're like, okay, if I skip my turn 1 and hero power on 2, I'm dead. Not the case with Rogue. Rogue can pass turn 1, Dagger on 2. Ideally, you play a 1, right? You can see the first deck had 2 veterans and a South Sea deckhand. Second deck didn't have any 1s, so it's not vital, right? And ideally, you play a 1 and a Dagger. But if you have cards like Sap, Betrayal, you can get away with pass into Dagger, into a strong 3. That's where it comes in, right? Turn 3 is where you can't mess around. You can't go pass, Dagger, you know, do whatever. So I do like to get the weapons, the Shadow Blades and the Perditions. You can see that both decks are running those weapons. I take max 3. So 2 to 3, preferably 2, sometimes 3, depends a bit, because I don't really count them for my curve unless I have a lot of 2s. Because you don't want to weapon on turn 2 and then override that weapon playing a Shadow Blade. That makes no sense. So if you have a lot of 2-drops, you can count them as your turn 3 curve. If you don't, make sure you have additional good 3-drops on top of those weapons. You can see that the first deck here has a Pixie, a Fox, Crusader, and a Tanglefur Mystic on top of having 2 Shadow Blades, right? So that gives you 6 good plays on turn 3, 4 of those being the minions, while this deck has 2 2-drops, so that somewhat evens out, right? You can get 2 into weapon, or you can Dagger into 3. The second deck here has Pixie, Fox, Marshdrake, which is okay with your Dagger on 2, Tar Creeper, and 2 Vrygools, so that's where you're definitely in the safe zone, but that's because the deck also has less strong 2s. It has a Shiny Finder and a Zealot, which is not ideal. still has those predictions played, because those weapons are also what help you fix situations in the mid game without having to take too much damage. Being able to use your predictions on a 5-2, the activation, right, not the weapon, can be the difference between you surviving or not surviving that game. Right, another tool to help you survive in a deck, especially where you have a lot of value, is a card like Shiv. Shiv or Fan of Knives. Fan of Knives is usually hard to get because they rate it somewhat highly, right, the system, so I can't always pick Fan of Knives if I want it, but Shiv is almost always free. So this is actually something I learned when I was playing around with Adwokta a couple weeks ago, where I never rated Shiv very highly because I've always played a more aggressive style with Rogue. I don't think aggressive Rogue is that good right now. I think that this is a very safe style to play because you'll both be fine versus the Paladins because you're drafting cards like Betrayal, like Shadowblade, like Perdition's Blade, and Sap to get you back on board. And you have enough stuff versus mages. You have your Banshees, your mid-rangey bodies, and your late game. So I feel like this is a safe style to play because you don't have any matchup where you're like, I can't do anything here. Whereas aggressive rogues versus a mage with Blizzard, which is quite common right now, you're not gonna have a good time, right? You need to play very efficient as an aggressive rogue to still beat a mage who's gonna Blizzard you on curve. So in this kind of style, Shiv performs a lot better than in an aggressive rogue, because in an aggressive rogue, you don't care about your life total, you'll just dagger. In this kind of a rogue, your life total matters, so being able to Shiv instead of daggering something is pretty nice. So cards like Betrayal, cards like Shiv, cards like Perdition's Blade, Shadowblade, those are the cards that allow you to deal with the board without dying. Okay? So that's my formula with Rogue. That's what's been working for me. You can call it a slightly slower Rogue, a defensive Rogue, whatever you want to call it. But that's what's been working for me. Not the play a bunch of guys, cold blood them, and hit you in the face kind of Rogue. Okay, let's move on. So we've covered the two popular classes, right? I'll pull out a bit of a wild card because you might say, well, Shady, I didn't roll a Paladin or Rogue. What am I going to do? So you could pick Mage, which is statistically the third best class. I have not had that much success with it, but I have had people report to me that they do okay to well with it. And most of the time, it's more minion focused, right? Just which would make sense because the game is very tempo oriented. So pick your good curve, pick like cards like Water Rally and Strong Threes, or just high roll a mage deck, which is what I see most of my mage opponents doing, like get 2 Meteors, 2 Flame Strike and Blizzard, but you don't need my advice for that, right? So, but what I have been doing is I have been playing Warlock. So I have 2 lists here for you guys. Both of these Warlock decks went 12, and I used both of them on my leaderboard run, so it's definitely not something that I take lightly and just say, oh, I just messed around with some Warlock and it happened to work. No, I picked this on my leaderboard run, so Warlock is my go-to third class, and it's because Zoo's back in town, baby. Ooh, I love playing Zoo, and it is very efficient in this kind of a meta because Warlock is so good at playing tempo efficient because you can just vomit all your cards on the board, and then when you're out, just start drawing some more. So I'm a huge fan of Warlock right now. I'll still pick Rogue or Paladin over it, even though my Warlock average is 12 right now. You know, I've played 2 Warlocks on my leaderboard run, and they both went 12, but that's variance, of course, right? Let's have a look at the decks and see what made them perform so well. So first up here, this deck is definitely the better one, right? The first deck. We have 2 Fireflies and a Librarian for turn 1, and then a decent-ish turn 2, not too crazy, right? A Rund, Tidehunter, Mana Addict, and Sun Cleric. But then it's the stuff later on in the deck. It's the fact that we have decent force, but then a Dreadlord, 2 Doom Guards, 2 Feeding Times, and then as win condition, Bone Marrow, Violet Worm. This deck actually went 12-0 because it felt so good to play. Doomguard right now is amazing because the game is so tempo oriented. You don't care about cards you lose. You can just tap later on once you have the board. Once you have the board, you're under pretty much no pressure. So that's been what's been working for me. Go all out for tempo. I usually get offered like 3, 4 AoEs maybe in the run. I try to pick one. I think in Zoo having one AoE can absolutely bail you out. If you're forced into picking 2, that's not the end of the world, right? Sometimes there's gonna be a pick where you're like, well, I mean, it's gotta be a Hellfire here, right? So that happens and it's no problem. I wouldn't pick more than 2 because if you're a Zoo, you don't want to be clearing the board. It's more, oh, my opponent somehow managed to get ahead. I get to Shadow Flame my guy, we're good now. Or I get to Hellfire, we're good now. So it's more like a backup card. So, like with the other classes, what makes it work? Early game. If you can get more 1-drops, pick him, right? So this deck had 2 Fireflies and Librarian. I skipped 1 Librarian for Bone Mare at the very end, just because the deck was really light and Bone Mare just felt such a good pick in a deck that's so likely to have the board. So especially after the Doomguard swing, right? You might argue with only 3 1s and not an amazing selection of 2s, you're not super likely to have the board, even though probably still more likely than on average. But then after the Doomguard or the Dreadlord swing, you're very likely to be in control of the board, and then the Bone Mare hits later on, and it's just very nice. But early in the draft, I wouldn't do that. Early in the draft, I'd pick the Librarian over the Bone Mare, because you can replace the Bone Mare with other things, right? You can, like we said, pick Violet Worm. Like you see Violet Worm in all my decks. This is because I really like it as a finisher. I think it's an excellent big boy. The only thing it struggles with is Polymorph, and that's not super common right now. So I like Violet Worm. But you can pick other things. You see that the other deck has a Boulderfist Ogre, a Fungal, and a Rock. Those are kind of finishers then. You can pick, let's see, you can even pick the 8/8 guy that heals you, the Doctor, right? Just a big thing, so you don't just tap through your entire deck. Because that happens, right? If you have a Zoo deck with only early game, you end up tapping and you just fatigue yourself, and you don't have anything to kill him with. So have a couple things to kill him with. You can see the first thing, that's the Worm, the Bone Mare, the Doomguards. The Sneaky Devil was also surprisingly good. Well, not so surprisingly, it's Zoo after all. The second deck had Worm, Ogre, Nesting Rock, then Fungal, and I guess the Dreadlords always help you to finish them off. The Soulfires were very cool. I always tried to get 1. I haven't experimented with 2, but it's more from memory that 2 Soulfires didn't feel as good. I will try 2 eventually, but I have been skipping the second one. But 1 has felt so amazing for the same reason the Doomguard feels so amazing. It's that if you do fall behind on board, or your opponent just has a Yeti and you have a 1/1, you can just put the 1/1 in Soulfire the Yeti. 1 mana, Yeti is gone. Suddenly you're in control of that board. So all these cards that sacrifice value to gain tempo are just very good right now. Doomguard, Soulfire, those kind of things. That's pretty much it. Just draft, good curve, draft early game. You can see that we will be, like the second draft, I only got offered 2 1-drops and I jumped at the opportunity to pick them. Flame Imp, Squire, both really good ones. If I could have had 5 1-drops, I would have, right? If I could pick triple Flame Imp and 2 Squires, sign me up, absolutely. Because if you get the board, you can replenish that value later by life tapping. I guess on a final note, for the Warlock archetype, we talked about that as well with the Paladin, is how do you deal with the bigger minions, right? In Paladin, we were picking Equality, Conviction, etc. For Warlock, I don't feel like you absolutely need it if you have Doomguard, because sometimes you're just gonna Doomguard his guy out of the way. Doomguard has 7 health, so there's not that many big minions that end up killing your Doomguard in the return, right? If they have a Grizzly, if they have a Hungry Etten, the Doomguard usually just gets to chunk in there. If you don't have Doomguards, I do suggest picking up Unwilling Sacrifice if you can. Siphon Soul is almost always at a premium, so I would rather not. I think you always pick Dreadlord over Siphon Soul when it's offered, just because it's a ridiculous card. But Unwilling Sacrifice is somewhat cheap, so if you notice that you don't have any Doomguards, or just in general cards that could deal with your opponent's big minions, you might want to consider picking up 1, maybe 2 Unwilling Sacrifices, which did do work for the second deck. Alright guys, That's it for me. Try to keep it short and sweet. See that we still racked it up to half an hour. Can't help myself, but I just want to help you guys. I want to give you guys as much information as possible. If you guys enjoyed the video, please do hit like and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.